What's up, Star Mindsets? I'm excited to tell you about this episode today. I actually had a chance to meet Simon out in San Diego last year in April, and I've uploaded the podcast to Spotify, but have since yet to upload it on YouTube. And right now, I'm just trying to grow that YouTube channel. This is a really incredible conversation. In life, you end up meeting people who have lived or entered a path that you're currently on, and it's kind of like a video game. They come back in time to give you tips and tricks. Yeah, it's a good conversation. If you haven't already, check out our new website. We're going to be launching merch products soon. We'd like to be a brand that advocates for entrepreneurship at all levels, all ages. Entrepreneurship is really the vessel that can move the world to a better place, and knowledge and information all over the internet. But it was in this book by Shane Parrish that told me the best way to get information is directly from the source. That's kind of like the guru or the person who has that wealth of wisdom to provide. So that's what we like to do here on the podcast. We like to talk to smarter people than me, and really pick their brain and get to know them. This is a good podcast. Check it out. If you're kind of destined or bound to do something, you'll find inspiration from people who have done something like that before. 4 years of the podcast and never expected to reach 100 episodes, make it a company, and actually get a book deal with Penguin Random House, their Southeast Asia branches. If you really want to do something, opportunities will arise, and they'll present itself to you. It's all about meeting forces and seeing those things through. I mean, we don't control where these things will lead to, but it's better to try than not try at all. More on that on another day, but yeah, here's the episode, and thank you for the time.
Well, good morning, Star Mindsets. This is another special episode of the show. I'm extra energized and just excited to speak to this person today. This guy's an author as well as a life coach of the year, and he's the author of this great book called Energize, which, because the screen is blurred, it does not pop up, but I'm doing this for professional purposes. But anyway, it's written by Simon Alexander Ong, and I stumbled upon Simon's work, I think, in the summer. Quite interesting, actually. I think for some reason he actually viewed my story on social media on Instagram, and I was like, "Huh, this looks interesting." And then I, clicked on his profile, and I realized he wrote a book, and I was like, "Oh wow, this looks kind of cool." And then, a couple of days later, I downloaded an Audible and started listening to it, and found myself to be energized, and actually sent him a message saying, "Hey Simon, I think it'd be a great idea to do a podcast with you to talk about your book and your work and your life." And fast forward to February, that's today. So Simon, I just want to say thank you so much. Humbled and honored to be able to have conversations with you.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for asking and inviting me onto your show today.
Absolutely. Well, Simon, are you in the office or you're at your house, just your apartment? Curious.
Yeah, I'm home. I think one of the positives from the COVID pandemic is I learned how to spend more time at home. One, was we had no choice. We couldn't go outside, so we had to learn to work from home. But second, in 2020, I became a parent for the first time. And so, of course, I wanted to spend more time at home with the family.
Wow, yeah. I'm at home as well. I do have access to an office. The thing is that it's a little bit far away and early in the morning here in the West Coast, so I didn't want to, run through tons of seagoers and be able to have this conversation. But I do got to ask you, I guess, there's so much that you've been doing, and over the past year with the book, of course, coming out. But prior to that, you also talk about how you were an investment banker, and the book starts with this story where you were in a hotel room, I believe, stumbling, kind of drunk, and I think you passed out, if I'm not mistaken, and you realized you had to change your life from that very moment. I just got to ask you, Simon, when you reflect on that moment specifically, what do you think about it was about that moment particularly? Because maybe there have been similar ones in the past, but that one sparked the action and the chain that's changed your career and life.
I think what made that moment particularly pivotal was the fact that it was beginning to impact my relationship. This this was a point where my girlfriend, who's now my wife, but my girlfriend at the time, she was seeing my demise. She was seeing how this job was essentially killing my physical and mental health. And we ended up speaking after this particular moment about what I was going to do about it. And I think when I realized that this could impact more than just my own health, it could actually affect my relationship, I began to make changes. I didn't like where I was. I didn't like where I was ending up. And what I thought was a successful career was actually very unfulfilling. It taught me that success and fulfillment can be very different. And so it was the catalyst for me to begin exploring what I really wanted to do in life, and also being more intentional about the way that I lived each day.
Wow. I do got to ask you too. The book's title is Energize.
Mm.
Where exactly did you come up with when did you become keen to energy? Just because uh, in business and life, there's a lot of things to pay attention to. But when I was just reading this book and hearing all these stories, like energy is everything, as you say. And I was like, wait, I can't really argue with that because it is. How did you come up to that thesis, or that realization?
I I think the major contributor to that realization was reflecting on my journey you know within the journey of going from being an employee to being an entrepreneur. And when I reflected on that journey, I realized that it was not a question of time, but a question of energy when it came to doing the things that most people won't do.
Hmm.
You know, many of us have dreams of businesses we want to start, of things we want to experiment with, of careers we want to switch into, but we don't do it. Now, what holds us back is a lack of energy. We tend to think it's time. I want to be more productive, so I've got to manage my time better. But the truth is, we always have time. But if we don't have the energy to put into the time to do what we want to do, we simply don't get it done.
Hmm.
So to give an example, if somebody got given a day off work, what do you think the average person would do with that time? Now, most of us would probably wake up late. We would switch on the television. We would see whatever's on television, and we would finally get into our groove, into our day during the afternoon. And by that point, most of the day has already gone. And so it's not really a question of time, it's a question of energy. When you've got the energy, when you are physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually on fire, what happens is that you bring more into hours than most will bring into weeks and months.
That's such a wildly, I think, just insightful answer, because there's so many ways to look at how come somebody doesn't want to do something. And I think, I've heard you speak about the reducing the gap between ideas to action and execution. And a lot of that is energy, and sometimes internally it's there's a lot of these doubts, right? Like, for instance, what's holding you back is just your own self. And I think you say that a lot in the book. But I think, with the energy thing, it's not necessarily let's have 5 cups of coffee, right? Or it's not like let's let's like have a drill sergeant yelling at us, exactly. And that energy is something that's very, wouldn't say impossible to, it's just tough to create and just tough to produce. Especially when somebody has these thoughts of like, oh, I'm really tired, I'm burnt out, I have like 2 kids to pick up today, and like there's always a cycle of um just oh, I'll do it when I have a full days of rest. But what you speak about in the book is something I really like to
Mm.
bring attention to, is the thought of energy management. And
Mm.
for you, Simon, I know you have been writing, you've published a book, and things have just been seeming like a never-ending amount of work. But for you, it's like you always have this good energy around what you're
Mm.
doing. It seems like, how do you think not only you produce this, but people you've seen in life, how can they get out of ruts or energetic blocks or challenges
Mm.
towards having good energy?
Well, great. I mean, you've touched on some fantastic points there, Dan, and I just want to speak to a couple of things that I heard that I think important for the listeners. So, the one example you shared earlier was, most of us, when we think about getting energy, yeah, we might go for a caffeine hit, or we might go for some short-term fixes. But the thing is, that is not sustainable. It's great if you just need some short-term energy, you need a quick fix because you've had a long night, or you need the energy to go into a meeting with, but it's not sustainable. These are what I call artificial energy fixes. You want to focus on things that are sustainable, that can keep your energy high over the long term. You also mentioned how many people feel exhausted, whether you are parents or you are keeping down multiple jobs or whatever it is that is demanding your time and energy. The fact is, when people say they're exhausted, it's usually a question of a couple of things. One is you're not managing your energy properly, or two, it is very likely that you are low on spiritual energy. Now, what I mean by the fact that you are low on spiritual energy is that you are likely doing something that goes against who you are. Now, if you look at society around you, what you will notice is that many of us are exhausted, not because we are physically doing too much, but because we're doing too little of the things that bring us joy. And we are often running someone else's race. Now, when I look at my journey, you mentioned that post the book, it's been a bit of a roller coaster. I'm doing lots of things, I'm traveling. This is the beautiful thing about doing things that give you energy. When you do things that give you energy, you actually get more energy.
Right.
When you are in a state of flow and you're doing things that come naturally to you, that give you fulfillment and a sense of purpose, what happens is that gives you more energy. So for me, I'm actually more excited and more energized because of all the things that are happening since the book's release.
Sure.
On the other side, it's also important to manage your energy. Many of us are quick to yes to that message that comes in with a calendar invite for a meeting, or yes for that social event that pops in our calendar, or yes for the holiday plans. But how often and how quick are we when it comes to booking me time in our calendar? When was the last time that you blocked out time just to be, just for you to disconnect and pause amongst the chaos of noise around us?
Yeah, that's very true. I actually went on vacation to Hawaii, I believe, for back in December, 2 months ago, and I realized I live in Silicon Valley and San Francisco and California in general. There's always this feeling of everybody's in a rush to be somewhere, or maybe this idea of I've got to be making more money than these are the things that I've heard people say. That's not how I feel personally. However, I just see that it's like this rat race, right? Like, and that's kind of the 9 to 5 thing, and that's why a lot of people have chosen entrepreneurship in the recent years, because they saw what living at home in a pandemic would cause them to, realize. And I guess the quick question to you is, with all the changes that have happened since COVID pandemic, and people wanting to change their lives and how it's already changed our lives, what energy do you think that had? What effect do you think that had on our energy? Because a lot of people were just negative, or they didn't want to continue their jobs, similar to your experience, and become entrepreneurs. Just what do you think about it? Prior to somebody becoming an entrepreneur, what can you tell us about that energy specifically?
Well, typically when someone goes from working for someone to working for themselves, it's because they believe that there is something more, that they're not getting something when they're working for someone else. Now, what gives us the impetus to take action, if you will, is the desire to create something different to what has come before. Now, for many of us, we simply don't get the time to reflect on, am I doing what I want to do? Am I doing something that I want to do for the next 10 years? COVID gave us that opportunity. We couldn't go outside, so the only place we could go was inwards. We went inwards, which meant so many of us had more time than we ever had to reflect. We had time to consider our options. And when we realized what was important, for some people, it was more time with the family. It was more time to pursue hobbies. It was more time to do things that brought happiness and joy. We began to realize that the career or job we were in would not give us that. And so as we came out of the pandemic, we started to hear terms such as the great resignation, quiet quitting. What people were actually doing was that they were beginning to take ownership for their life. They were beginning to live with intention. And one of the things I often say to people is that life truly begins the very moment that you take responsibility for where you are and where you want to be.
It's a very, very crucial point. I mean, it's not making a joke of it, because you apply it to every person who's listening, or myself. It's reality. it's very much reality. And Simon, you had so many great parts of the book. I'm not sure that I'll be able to cover all of them, but one of them I really did enjoy was you mentioned Visitation Valley Middle School in San Francisco, where I live. And I had friends who have gone to that. Maybe during that time you brought up in the book, the summer school where there was gang violence and danger around that school. And I just wanted to ask you, like, how did you and the writers of your book figure out to include that as a story? Because that school, in, I guess, inner city youth at a lot of places in not only US, but I'm sure the United Kingdom and around the world, they struggle with this notion of being able to focus and just having that environment not dictate getting good grades or having a good self-esteem life, good social interactions. When you picked that story particularly, how did you realize that had enough correlations to energy, or just insights to the point that you're trying to make?
Sure. Well, and then this will give a bit of behind the scenes of how I put the book together. But when I did the research for the book, I wanted to include stories that I came across over my years as an entrepreneur that have had an impact on me. And I came across this story a number of years ago. And when I first read it, I was like, I have to keep a digital version of this story because it was a great demonstration about the power of quiet time. The fact that when we slow down, when we create moments of silence, what happens is that it not only connects us to who we are, but it also develops our emotional maturity. And so when I talked about energy in that chapter, which was about really tapping into that energy we all have, and the only way we can do that is to deepen our self-awareness, I wanted to include that as one of the stories, because I wanted to show that even children, when they were able to slow down, when they were able to connect with that energy inside of them, even children could see and witness powerful transformation. Now, if they can do it, we can certainly do it. And so I really want to showcase that in the book. But also it was for diverse stories. I didn't want just stories from the UK. I wanted stories from the US, from my Asian heritage, and so on. I wanted to include diverse ranges of stories so that whoever picked up the book, they could resonate with what I shared.
Wow, that's quite incredible. And I just, found that, it's a very well-written book, just from the, what do you call that? The reader's perspective. I have an English degree, but that doesn't mean that I'm a, I'm a critic of books at all. I'm actually writing a book myself. And I think another thing that I wanted to touch upon in your book was, you mentioned this part where Donnie, who was somebody, or actually a little bit, to kind of set the context, you had I read somewhere that you had a bloody nose and you were coming to
I have weak capillaries on my nose.
So you had a bloody nose or something like that, and you were about to do a keynote event or a talk, right? But your wife had, maybe, I forget the full 100%, but your wife had written flashcards or something, and like you were where are they?
Just to recap the story. So this was my first paid speaking gig. And of course, there are some nerves that come with that. And so what I had to do is I really prepared for this talk. And so I put my notes on some flashcards. I got them ready to bring with me to the event. But unfortunately, I forgot them. I brought the wrong set of notes with me because I was in a rush to make sure I got to the venue on time. And I didn't check my phone, but my wife was basically sending me pictures of the flashcards. I didn't know until after the event. And so what happened is, before that, I think it must have been the pressure got to me a little bit. And I started to have a bit of a bloody nose. I went to the toilet to clean it up. I had to put a bit of tissue in my nose to stop the bleeding coming out. I went back into the room, did my thing, just trusted that I knew what I was going to speak about. And I came across, I didn't know he was having the impact it had on him, but Donnie was in the room, and it affected him. And it was amazing how that experience came full circle when he recognized me in the gym.
Was that in the gym? So that he had met you 5 years ago, like 5 years span, and then like 5 years later, he
Yeah,
realized who you
so
were.
to be fair, I didn't remember him at the time because I met lots of people at the event. So I had no recollection of him that night. But of course, the more you speak, the more people you get to impact and the more people you get to interact with. And of course, he remembered me because something I said must have clicked with him and he made certain changes. And so, him recognizing me in that changing room, I guess he just wanted to express, first of all, some gratitude, but also tell me what had happened since that moment.
Wow, that is powerful. Just to, I think I was reading too, and he became an entrepreneur or something like that, or it started his own
Yeah,
business.
it's incredible. And I think that is one of the greatest rewards for the work that I get to do, is to hear stories of transformation, to hear stories about people who have taken what I've shared and applied it in some small way that has acted as the catalyst for their beautiful evolution and metamorphosis.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was an incredible story, and to know it's a real life story. This is real stuff. Like not like it's hard to realize that what you actually speak about and written about is all reality. And sometimes
Mm.
you listen to books and take you don't take the moment to realize like this is a true like true this is not simulation. Like this is actually real life. It's kind of mind boggling.
I think the lesson from this, Dan, is the fact that we must never underestimate the
Hmm.
influence that we can have on someone else's life when we come from a place of serving, when we come from a place of service, where we want to add value through the words we speak, for the stories we share, and the lessons we tell. I got an Instagram DM the other day from someone who said to me, Simon, I'm on holiday in Thailand on an island called Phuket. And I just saw someone on the roadside reading your book.
Ah,
And he took a very blurry photo because he was doing it in passing. And he took a photo and he sent it to me and said, just wanted to share that your books reached the shores of Thailand.
wow.
And for me, it was incredible. But again, it's a beautiful demonstration that you never know who is following your work and
Hmm.
how your work is positively impacting their life.
Yeah, that's interesting too, Simon. I guess like with the social media, whether it's LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, a lot of because I think I do this in my own business, right? Like where I'm looking at how to increase numbers and all the statistics, but the statistics that matter to me were the ones that never really get shown on the metrics, where it's like somebody listens to a podcast I did and says, Dan, like you have a really good voice. And I think the whole day, like, oh man, like I sound like a dork sometimes. But just realizing those things that matter in maybe a business metric or it's a revenue thing or it's a product use type of thing, that doesn't really appeal to the person as much as the amount of how much impact or service, as you allude to, is oh, your book changed my life, or your book has given me strength, or just made me smile today. Something so small.
I agree. I think the business metrics serve a purpose,
Uh-huh.
and of course they are useful when you're conducting some analysis. But for me, our conversation now, Dan, reminds me of something that one of my mentors once told me. So one of my mentors has been Bob Berg, who co-wrote the book The Go-Giver. He lives in Florida. It's a book that became a bestseller. And he once said to me, money is an echo of value. Money is an echo of value. So the more value that you deliver into the world, the more money that you will receive in time.
Wow.
And so you can't measure your value by a business metric. As you said, you might post on social media, I might post on social media, but yet the message I get from someone that says, Simon, can we book you to speak at a conference, is from someone who follows me but has not engaged on my post. And yet they'll send me a message saying, Simon, how do we book you to speak at our conference? And that is the reward for delivering value through the work that we do.
I gotta agree with you. I think coincidentally, switching or seeing it as a two-way street, I guess I got a lot of DMs from people who want to be on this podcast, and I didn't even realize that was one of my goals. It wasn't one of my goals, but but just realizing, as you say, you put value into the world, and money is an echo of it. It's actually I've been receiving money some form. So that's quite incredible. Well, Simon, I gotta ask you too, because I think a lot of your story I relate to a little bit. I used to work for a VC fund here in San Francisco, and a lot of those people, they were ex-investment bankers, similar to what you said you were doing at Lehman, right? Like looking at numbers and portfolio securities. And you know, a lot of people, they work their whole entire life for that career, and it's really hard to get in the first place. And then once you get there, you're getting sucked the life out of you, it seems like. But a lot of people, they do that job purely for the money and purely for, you know, monetary gain. And a lot of what the world kind of shows us, whether that's looking on your phone, coincidentally through advertising, or peers who might post something in your friend group about you know, oh, I got this great job, but it's just a money thing, and people just really see money as the ultimate goal, where you may have already had that job where it paid good amount and could set you up for life. But and I've also similarly experienced that too when I worked for a celebrity in Hollywood and seeing that money wasn't everything. When you were at Lehman, and of course the financial crisis happened, you're thinking to yourself, what were you thinking to yourself? Because, you know, at the one point your financial life is good, maybe, and then but the other point your personal life is going downhill. Like what were you thinking at those specific times?
If I'm honest, Dan, I was completely lost. You know, because I grew up, and I grew up with a I'm going to say typical Asian household.
I'm Asian too.
So what I mean by that is the fact that my family had high expectations. You know, they wanted me to do well academically. They wanted me to go to a good university. They wanted me to get a well-paying job. And so my definition of success was limited to certain career choices. And so I did banking because I thought that it would get me the respect of my family, that they would be proud of where I was. But when the financial crisis happened, I quickly realized this industry wouldn't be what it once was. You know, a few years prior to the financial crisis, you could be earning big bucks in the financial industry. Post-crisis, there were lots of regulation. You know, governments were intervening, and they said, you know, you had to vest your bonus over a number of years, and people weren't paying as much because suddenly bankers were viewed as evil. They were viewed as the villains of the world. And so suddenly I had this internal dilemma of, do I continue this career because I thought it was going to make me successful? Or do I reconsider that because clearly this industry isn't what it once was? So that was on the professional side. On the personal side, I was just completely exhausted, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. I was working long hours. I was surviving on takeaway food and junk. I never found time to move my body. I got little sleep. And so I think all of these things just compounded, and it just made me feel directionless and powerless. And so starting to take back some control of my life was literally that first step. And I said to myself, well, the first place I have to begin is my health. You know, I was a little overweight, and it was affecting my energy. And I decided to prioritize exercise, get more rest, and start changing my diet. And just those small steps really gave me a foundation to build upon.
Absolutely. I think that's quite interesting. I think, going a little bit off on tangent, something I could not wrap my head around in the beginning when when the point in the book that you say, oh, absolutely great point to bring attention to is don't treat your health as a side hustle. So so going into that, maybe seeing how it is in I guess like in real life terms, when somebody is trying to work out for the first, or actually one thing I want to bring attention to, just clear my head, was how exactly is it that once you work out you have more energy? Because when you start you don't have as much energy, and then you do something that you think would you do expend energy, but it gives you more energy. How is that I can't comprehend that, because it's I
Sure.
can, but it's hard to understand.
So first of all, many of us might not feel motivated to work out. That's a fact. Many of us might wake up in the morning with the best intentions, but then for whatever reason, we feel it's raining outside, it's dark. We come up with an excuse, and we just don't feel motivated to work out. However, I guarantee you that after you have worked out, however you felt before, after you work out, you never regret that workout. You never regret that workout. And here's why. What happens is when we move our bodies, what happens is we are generating feel-good hormones. We're generating feel-good chemicals. So what that does is it elevates our energetic state. So if you are potentially facing a challenge for the day ahead, you are going to be in a far better position to respond to it after a workout than if you didn't do a workout. And that's because how you see that challenge will be very different. So what's happening is not only are you elevating your physical energy from the standpoint of those chemicals being released into your body, but you're also elevating your mental energy. Wow. So your mind is clearer and it's much easier to focus on what is essential. Now, a simple exercise that I often get corporates to do, because of course, when I'm speaking at a company, I can't suddenly start a gym session with people in the suits. But one exercise I like to do just to show them what happens to their energy when they move their body is I get them to stand up in a room. So let's say we have 40 to 50 people standing up in a room dressed in suits. And I ask them to think about one achievement that they are proud of having accomplished in, let's say, the last month or the last quarter. And with that, I ask them to move around the room and tell each person they bump into what that one accomplishment was that they are proud of. All the other person has to do in response is to give them a double high five. Now, we do that for about 10 minutes. Can you imagine what the energy is like by the end of it? Everyone's double high fiving, everyone's moving around double high fiving. By the end of it, I get them to sit down and I ask them, 0 to 10, what is your energy right now? And I have some people saying 10, 11, 12. Basically, what's happened is just by moving for 10 minutes and high-fiving each other, they've literally increased their energetic state.
Man, that is special. That is I envisioned in my mind. I think my energy spiked up a little bit, which is good. Well, Simon, one more something else I wanted to bring attention to was you had like 100 great points in there. I'm not going to get into all of them. However, something that I really enjoyed learning about was something you I think what I've also learned from a book called Think and Grow Rich was you have to have definiteness of purpose and possess a compelling vision. When you were starting out as an entrepreneur, was that vision to write a book? What was that vision about? Was it to help people in the life coach capacity and just get them out of ruts that were similar to yours? Or what was your original vision?
When I first started, it was simply to make a difference through coaching. That was it. And the reason is because that's all I knew. I only knew that I wanted to be a coach. I didn't realize that down the line, I would also be a speaker, an author. I would be partnering with some exciting brands.
Yeah.
I didn't know all of those things would happen. But I think with a vision, the difference between a vision and a goal is that the vision will evolve as you make progress forwards, as your connections increase, as you open new doors to different opportunities. That vision will evolve because, of course, you as a person will evolve. And so a vision can change over time, whereas a goal can be quite rigid. So for me, that vision, of course, has changed. And I think when some people say, I don't know what my vision is, or I don't know what my purpose is, the fact is you don't have to know everything from the beginning. But to get clearer, to get that clarity, you've got to take some steps forward. So you just start with a simple vision. So in my case, my simple vision was, I want to be a successful coach making an impact. Now, as I take steps forward, what happens is my vision starts to get more clearer. And then I write it down more and more and more to the point my vision has now become 1 page of A4. At the beginning, it was probably just a couple of lines.
Yeah.
But as I've got more depth of understanding about my strengths, what's important to me, and what I want to achieve, that vision has become longer and more detailed.
Yeah, it's just so amazing to figure that out. Are you still a life coach now, or has your life changed where you don't coach anymore?
So I still coach, but not as much as I used to, Dan. When I first left employment to build my coaching practice, I would say 80% of my revenue came from one-to-one coaching and 20% came from other sources. Now, and especially since the book was published, 80% plus of my revenue comes from speaking, and 20% comes from one-to-one coaching, consulting, and mentoring work.
That is so amazing, to think that, well, a lot of people have achieved this in life, but me, I'm thinking big dreams and big goals too, and just kind of feel like it's possible. It's something that's interesting. As an entrepreneur who was writing a book about entrepreneurship and kind of became an entrepreneur quite recently, as you form an LLC and things are not as amazing. Point that you brought up was is it an interest, or is it a commitment, or is it an interest, right? And I just realized that, like, that with my own work, like this podcast was interest at first, and then it just morphed and evolved, as you say, into a commitment. And I say that with what do you call that? Integrity and just intention. But when you were talking about the whole point of is it an interest or is it a commitment, for you in your journey, did you think that life coaching was an interest? Well, of course, at first it was an interest, right? But then, what moment in time did it become a commitment? Because it's something that you decide. It's not necessarily, you don't have a boss as an entrepreneur, and you don't have like a stakeholder investor necessarily. So who told you to make it a commitment, or was it always a commitment at the start, and it was just an interest and a commitment at the same time?
So like yourself, Dan, it evolved. So at the beginning, it was merely an interest, which got me started. So I went to a 2-day seminar, which was talking about coaching as a skill. And by the end of that weekend, I enrolled as a student. So I wanted to learn about coaching as a skill and a tool. Now, not everyone who graduates from this certification goes on to become a coach as a business. Some people will take that skill and they'll go back to the corporate world and they'll apply the skill of coaching to their role within the company. Some will go and start a business around coaching. For me, the moment it became a commitment, I think, was when I saw an interview with the Olympian Usain Bolt.
Ah.
And I remember towards the end of his career, just before he announced his retirement, one of the journalists in the room asked a question to Usain Bolt. And the journalist asked, what was your moment in which you went from Usain the nobody to Usain Bolt the champion? Was there a particular moment mentally that had to shift for you? And he responded to the question by saying when he grew up as a young athlete, he was inspired by the likes of Muhammad Ali. And he said that if you look at the way Ali spoke with a level of commitment that meant it was only a matter of time before he got what he wanted. So when you asked Ali, what are your thoughts about your next fight? He wouldn't say things such as, well, I'm going to give it my best shot and hopefully I'm going to come out as the winner. He would say, I am the champion. I am so bad, I make medicine ill. And he would have these really funny sayings that would just speak commitment and confidence and focus. And what it taught Usain Bolt was the fact that he had to see himself as a champion before he was a champion. And so the moment he had that identity in his head, he woke up earlier than his competitors. He trained longer and harder. He was already acting as if he was a gold medalist, an Olympian, before he made it to the Olympics. And so for me, what I took from that story is that at the moment of commitment, I have to be one with my identity. I have to see myself as a successful coach. I have to see myself as somebody making an impact. And once I did, my habits and choices would be made.
Wow, that is the hidden gem. I can't believe. You would just think as a spectator, Usain Bolt is naturally gifted or he's genetically built, and he didn't have to work as hard as other people. But that's not the truth at all, right? Just it's all mindset, it's all energy, it's all kind of preparation, belief, all these separate entities that compose somebody to really achieve greatness. Another great point you touched on in the book too is I'm a real book nerd, if you can tell. It was the point of pronoia versus paranoia. And when I read this, I was like, as an entrepreneur or as somebody who's looking to achieve big things in life, there's always this point of paranoia where it's not going to work out. And I think, is this true that humans are naturally inclined to protect themselves. Because I was reading a book called, I think it was called Switch by Chip and Dan Heath, and they were talking about the elephant and emotion being the one to protect you, when really it's not, you're holding yourself back as much, but it's more about like, you don't want to see yourself get hurt. Think about somebody who's going to a job interview and they've been denied 20, 50 times already. They're like, this one's going to crush my spirit. However, when you think of pronoia, where it's this feeling of, I'm going to get the job, or I'm going to get the girl, or I'm going to get, the book deal, whatever it could be. There's two trains of thoughts here. And I'm just thinking like one's maybe more in the terms of pessimism versus optimism. And sometimes you're in the balance, trying to balance those two things. However, when you speak about pronoia, I couldn't, and what you spoke about a little bit earlier with Usain Bolt and Muhammad Ali, that's a little bit of a manifesting future in pronoia and positive belief. And you also talk about thinking about the possibilities, not the limitations. And in order to achieve those things, I do believe you have to be in that mindset and have that energy. And I'm just thinking like, if it was so simple, there would be people who would believe in pronoia as more, but how come that's not the case? Or can you just talk a little bit more about that word pronoia?
Sure. Well, simply put, Dan, the reason it is not the case is because we as humans, we like to overcomplicate things. Life is pretty simple. If we take a step back, what we observe is that we live in the feeling of our thinking moment to moment to moment. What that means is that there is no one reality. There is only customized realities. So when an event occurs, the way that you interpret it might be different to the way I do.
Absolutely.
Because it is our thinking that creates the fabric of our reality. Now, when we have awareness about the role of thought, that our thought creates reality, then we can start to choose better thoughts. And this is where the idea of pronoia and paranoia comes in. So what we bring into our thinking, we bring into our reality. So if you believe that people are out there to sabotage you or to trip you, or life is working against you, guess what? That becomes your reality. Whereas if you choose to view life through the lens of pronoia, that's you believing that life is working for you and not against you. So when you don't get that job, you're not letting that event dictate your emotion. You're simply saying, well, maybe the job wasn't meant for me. Maybe it's redirecting me to something better. So what's happening is that you're always looking to seek the lesson within every experience, understanding that it is not what happens to us that makes the difference, but it's how we choose to respond to what happens to us.
Man, I think it would take somebody like decades to learn that, but you made it such a great point. And actually, all the books I read, like that was something that I truly do remember to this day. Like I've read a lot of books over the years, not only as an English major or as a person who's in the 20s, but and is into the learning through books stuff. But just figuring out that that's such an insightful thing that you pick up a book and you think it's going to be similar to something you read in the past, or there's not enough insights to learn, or you've already learned the main insights, but there's always more insights. And this another great point you bring up is like being an eternal. The master realizes that he's or she or he is an eternal student, which is another amazing point. But one thing that you did bring up, I want to touch upon, because I actually learned about it in undergrad, was the fact that everybody has their own perception, and the way you think or the way someone else thinks is not the way that other person thinks. And that term back in the day, or 5 years ago in college, was called deterministic strains, where one person perceives the world the way that they perceive it is not how it can never be exactly 100% how somebody else perceives it. I thought that was just really unique to kind of see my college career connect with this in a real life experience. So that's very cool. How, I guess, like when you kind of dissect that point a little bit more, when it's everybody doesn't have their own shared perspective 100%. What kind of what were you trying to have us realize about that? Just because we're all going to have a different angle to understanding that. So is that the point, that we're all going to have a different angle to subjective matters? Or
well, first of all, is to understand that no one will know what you think 100%.
No.
And so when you speak to someone else, you want to keep an open mind, that they might be going through challenges you cannot see, because there could be challenges going in their mind that they're not sharing with you. Now, what I'm also pointing to in the book about this idea of your thought creates your reality and being aware of that is you cannot have self-development without self-awareness, because change begins with awareness. If you really want to develop your wisdom, it begins with knowing yourself. And that is why the saying, the longest journey we humans make are the inches from our heads to our hearts, is so powerful. It's because it speaks the truth. So as you begin that journey inward, it's to understand what have been the thoughts that I've had that have created my reality to date. And do I want to have those thoughts going forward? I.e., will they help me move forward to what is most important, or will they actually hold me back? And if they're going to hold you back, how can you choose more empowering thoughts that will actually energize you towards something that you want to achieve?
Wow, it's quite incredible. Another good point that I think you wrote about the book, and it kind of relates to my current situation. You had a friend, I think, who had $50,000 in debt or something.
Mm.
Do you remember this? Like, there was a point of this guy said, "Oh, I just have to make it now," and he flipped his thinking from "I'm in a hole" to "I'm in a place of abundance."
Mm.
Can you? I forget the whole 100%
Yeah,
of
so
what it
what
was.
happened was that he was in debt, and that was the biggest number in his life. And it was a cloud that was hanging over his head, and it was affecting him emotionally and mentally. But what he did is he took that number, he took away the minus from that number, and he added some zeros at the end. And he made that new number the focus of his energy. So what happened is
Yeah.
the biggest number now became the target of what he wanted to reach. And he had to begin with gratitude. That for him was a very tough part, because what we realize, but we don't appreciate until we practice gratitude, is that happiness begins with gratitude.
Ah,
If you can be grateful for who you have in your life, what you have in your life, then what happens is that you set the stage for abundance to occur. So he started to appreciate his family, the fact that they moved from a place in the world where there was war going on to here in the United Kingdom. He appreciated the fact that he could get presents at Christmas. So once he started to really appreciate these simple things, it gave him the energy to change things in his financial life so he can begin moving towards that big number. And since then, he has now launched multiple businesses. And let's put it this way, Dan, he doesn't have to worry about money now.
man, that's quite incredible. We regular folk, or people in general, they think that they have to be sincerely special to achieve or make a lot of money, and I guess they do have to. Kind of 3 points ago that you made, like, you kind of have to believe that you're like Muhammad Ali. The future is what you see in your mind, and but that doesn't go to say, like, that work and that sacrifice that we need to make does not matter at all, because it's definitely there. I think, Simon, when you approach just given a difficult challenge or reaching a higher number in revenue, whatever it could be, impacting more people in the world, and you feel like there's a point of view where you could take that these are challenges that are quite insurmountable, or just they don't play to my skills or my strengths. What would you say to, not maybe if we were to take the context not only to yourself but to someone in a similar situation where there's these challenges that they feel like they're climbing up the hill, they're not getting anywhere, but what do you tell people who are in deep ruts similar to your friend?
Sure. Well, if they are in a rut and they are experiencing challenges, the first thing I would say to them, which is to give them a bit of perspective, is that everyone faces challenges. Now, as you move up in the world, you still face challenges. I mean, just to give you an example, when I started my business, my biggest challenge at the beginning was simply getting clients. Because if I didn't get clients, I wouldn't have a sustainable business. Now, as my business grew, my next challenge became, well, how do I hire the right people? Now, because that's a big challenge, because if you hire the wrong person, then it can impact your business. And then as you get more successful, well, how do I handle all the inquiries I'm getting? So you're always going to face different challenges. Now, the question for you is, how are you dealing with the challenge? Because you're always going to get them. Whatever path you choose in life, you are going to be faced with challenges. And so the question for you is, how are you choosing to respond to them? And the best way to tackle any challenge is to simply break it down to the things that you can control first. Because when we face a challenge, what we often do is we look at the things we can't control.
Mm-hmm.
And when we look at the things we can't control, we become paralyzed by overthinking. But when we focus on the things that we can, we become energized to take action. So just to give an example that impacted everyone, the COVID pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
With the COVID pandemic, there were things that we couldn't control, but there were also things that we could. And the people who focused on the things that they could control were able to adapt in what was a very challenging few years.
Absolutely. That was unprecedented times, and we couldn't figure out what to do because we kind of didn't have control. But as a lesson is to focus on what you can control and definitely take those into actions. And I guess one couple more things, Simon. I'm really enjoying the conversation, but one thing I had to ask you is, when you talk about the reducing the gap from idea to execution, and this is really just relevant in maybe it's the gym scenario or the exercise scenario. Somebody has an idea to do something, but this self doubt or this paralysis, it widens the gap between idea to execution. And when you realize you have a couple, it works out when you do what you have to do. But then maybe there's like this person who's thinking they need to have X before they can do that. They can do Y. It's not necessarily that, right? It's just starting, really, and just
it is. It's just starting, and a lot of people might say, and I have heard this a lot, that Simon, I don't feel confident enough to begin. I don't feel confident enough to try this. The reality is, you don't need confidence. Confidence is a byproduct of doing the things that you didn't think you could do. What you actually need is courage. The courage to try, the courage to show up, the courage to fail, the courage to trust your gut instinct. And then what happens is that once you make progress, that's how you build confidence, because confidence comes from knowing that you can do things you've not done before. But you don't get that confidence before you've done it. You've got to do it before you get the confidence. And so what happens is that for many of us, that reason the first step is hard is because we have the self-doubt, we have the fears, we have the pressure, we have the focus on the negativity. So what we've got to do is focus on the tiniest thing that we can do. That is not impossible, but it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
And then we build what I call momentum.
Mm-hmm.
Because once you build momentum, what you're actually doing is you're building that I am going places feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start to build up that feeling, what happens is that carries you forward to the next action. So if I take an example for explanation purposes, if my idea is I want to be a public speaker, yet I've never done it before, I feel nervous and I'm not sure if people will like what I'm going to say, then what I would do is, let's say the idea is public speaker, I would break it down to a very tiny step that I can do. So maybe that first tiny step is I interview people. So the pressure isn't on me, but I'm going to interview other people.
Sure.
But I get to share the camera with them. So I'm going to interview other people on stage. I'm going to interview other people on video and so on. So that helps to build my confidence being in front of the camera or in front of an audience. And then maybe the next step is I want to speak as part of a panel. So I'm going to be part of a panel of, say, 4 to 5 people about a topic. And now what I'm doing is I've got that confidence and now I can speak on stage because I've done it amongst other people. And then maybe the next stage is I get interviewed. So now I'm the one being interviewed, but I still get to share the stage with someone else. And then the next stage is I'll speak on my own. So by the time you've got to that stage of speaking on your own, you've built up that confidence. You've done things before that shows you can do it. But what you've done is you've taken tiny steps forward. You've built momentum behind you. But if you go straight to speaking in front of an audience when you've never done it before and you have all these fears and doubts, of course, that's going to take a lot longer because you don't have any track record behind you. So focus on the very tiny steps first, build that momentum, and then you have the confidence to do things you didn't think you could do before.
Man, you just made me realize an interesting point in my life. When I was doing this podcast, I think like a year into it, a friend invited me to do improv stand-up comedy, and I did it 4 times in a row, and I got a couple of chuckles. So just to realize that something that it's all in our mind, it's all in kind of our bodies, right? Because even Robin Williams, even the most hilarious comedian we know, maybe Kevin Hart or somebody, they all had doubts and they were all stuck at somewhere internally, and it eventually progressed as momentum continued.
I think if it shows us anything, Dan, it is this. You know, there are always two sales that occur in life. The second is selling you to others, and the first is selling you to you. Until you have sold you to you, the second will always remain the challenge, because people feel that energy.
Yeah.
If you go on stage, if you talk to someone, if you try and sell something to someone, but you haven't first sold you to you,
yeah,
they're going to feel your uncertainty. They're going to feel the fact that you're not so sure. We can feel that energy. And so you have to focus on selling you to you first. And then when you get on stage or you sell something, you're going to come across a hell of a lot more convincing.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Simon, kind of getting towards the end of the conversation, I feel like I could talk to you all day. I don't know if we have all day, though. But just you know, in the interest of respect for your time, my time, and just making this something that a listener can understand and digest. I'd love to just ask you a couple last questions here. I guess, well, one thing that did pop up was when you brought up that point where you had your nose was bleeding at that first speaking event that you were doing, and that event finished. Did you feel like that was a successful event, or were you kind of against yourself a little bit because, you know, things went awry and you were?
I think on one hand, I was probably a bit harsh on myself because of how it started.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I forgot my notes. I ended up having a bloody nose. I had probably the worst possible start to my first speaking gig. So on that respect, I was a bit harsh on myself by saying it could have gone a lot better. On the other side, I had nothing to benchmark it against. You know, this was my first proper speaking invitation. And so because I had nothing to benchmark or reference it against, I was just like, well, let's do another one. Let's do another one. And then I can compare it and see if I've done better or worse. So for me, it kind of acted as a platform to want to try more of these events.
What was this event? Was this like 10, 12 years ago? Was it a really long time ago, or was it?
Yeah, this was probably one of the first, if not the first, I think, because I did a couple of speaking before, but it wasn't paid. This was the first paid event.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it was really the beginning of my speaking, I would say.
Wow. And what made you want to continue? Maybe, you know, you were a little bit hard on yourself, but did you love it? You loved it and hated it at the same time?
It was a combination of really enjoying the experience, and also the fact that I started to get a lot of inquiries from people saying, Simon, can we book you? Simon, can we bring you to speak at our event? And I started to realize maybe there's a reason why I'm getting a lot of inquiries. Maybe I should explore this a bit more. And so, yeah, I just decided to follow the breadcrumbs of insights, if you will. And before I knew it, I was speaking more than I was coaching. So it kind of all happened quite organically.
I gotta ask you, Simon, like with your business right now, what is like the main thing you focus on at the moment? Is it because I know you mentioned you're not as a full-time life coach, or not as much doing the life coach thing, and now you're an author who has to, I guess, promote the book and sell copies if that's part of the agreements and contracts and all that. What do you focus on, Simon, nowadays? Or where does your energy go towards?
So I would say majority, from a business perspective, the majority of my time goes into speaking now. So I do a lot of speaking events for the year, at conferences, at companies. So most of my time goes into that. I still do the coaching, but as I said, it's only a small handful of people now. The great thing about where I am in my journey is that I can be a lot more selective with who I work with. And that's great because it protects my time a lot more, and also my energy. Outside of that, I spend a lot of time with my family. You know, my wife and I, we've got a daughter now who's coming up to 3 years old. And to have the opportunity to choose when I spend time with the family is for me a privilege. You know, I don't go into an office. I can say, okay, I want to take today off, and I can spend time with my daughter. For me, that's a great position to be in.
Wow. Well, one thing that just popped in my head. Sorry, I'm a person who asks like 100 questions. I guess that's why I'm a podcast host. But when you were writing that book, or so out of all your accomplishments, I think I overheard you saying that writing this book here was sorry, it's blurred, but that was one of your biggest accomplishments. Would you say that was, if we were to go back to, that exercise you had those sales for, or those corporates do, tell us your biggest accomplishment?
Absolutely, absolutely. I would say writing that book has been one of the greatest achievements and also challenges that I have faced because of just the nature of the journey. In April 2020, I became a father for the first time.
Uh-huh.
In April 2020, the country went into its first national lockdown. And in the same month, April 2020, I got a book deal with Penguin.
Ah,
I now had to write a 65,000 word book with 24/7 distractions because none of our family could travel to come to our home because, of course, nobody could fly.
okay.
And everywhere was shut down. So my wife couldn't bring our child outside because everything was shut. And so we had to manage a family while running two businesses.
Ah,
My wife also runs a business. I run a business. And so as a result, we don't get maternity or paternity leave.
right.
And so if you don't have that leave, where's the money going to come from? And so we still had to work. Of course, we had to adapt the business as well because overnight, all my
Yeah.
speaking were cancelled.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I had to adapt my business. I ended up taking on more coaching clients so I could keep the revenue going. But I also had to write the book. And so that's why I say that getting through that part of my life to finish that book while raising a child with no family around, with the world shut down, having to adapt two businesses, for me was one of the greatest challenges, which also by its very nature makes writing a book one of my greatest accomplishments.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's I guess one of the really good books I've read, not just saying that, seriously. Simon, one thing, so when you were writing that book, you had help, of course, right? They had Penguin had like co-author, or what do you call them, co-editors, and
Yeah, so they had an editing team who I collaborated closely with. It was a new experience for me writing a book. This was my first book, and so I would write the first draft. I would get feedback. I would edit. I would get feedback, and so on. And so it's kind of bouncing back and forth between my input and the feedback of the editing team before we got to the final copy.
what pulled you or gravitated you to want to have a book, want to be an author, actually?
Again, what was very fortunate is that I didn't plan to be an author. In fact, I just started to have conversations with people in the publishing world. And before I knew it, the question came up, which was, Simon, if you were to write a book, what would you write about? And that's what started my thinking. I was like, well, if I am going to write a book, what would I write about? And then I started to brainstorm ideas. And then the idea that I put forward to Penguin was Energy is Everything. That was my working title, Energy is Everything. And of course, through the editing, we condensed the title to one word, Energize.
Well, that's quite impressive and definitely, impactful. I can't say the least. Okay, so I guess a couple last questions we like to ask our the guests on the show are, if you could give, the first one is, if you could give advice to a 20-year-old Simon Alexander Ong, what would you say if you could travel back in time?
Advice I would give to a 20-year-old Simon would probably be listen more to your heart than the opinions of others. The moment you free yourself of the opinion of others and focus more on what your heart is telling you, you will begin to live a life more true to yourself.
Wow, that's powerful. The second question is, if you could articulate your own startup mindset, what would you say it is?
If I could articulate my own startup mindset, a couple of things that come to my mind is a marketer who happens to be a coach and speaker, because I love marketing. I love accessing the creative part of my brain, and somebody who loves to codify success stories. So I would look at individuals, companies, projects, and I would see, why was that successful? And my brain would love to codify and reverse engineer the inputs to that so I could experiment with those things myself.
Wow. Well, and last thing here is, Simon, I know you got a book. People can purchase it on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. But what are things that you're looking forward to this year as a business or as an author in general? And when it comes to maybe the speaking world or the things you're going to create?
Lots of things. So I'm excited by more partnerships this year. I love partnering with different people and brands. So later this year, I'm going to be launching an Energize audio course, which is going to be in partnership with a US company. So what they do is they turn best-selling books into audio courses delivered to you via SMS or WhatsApp. I'm looking to partner with an artist who is going to help me create 5 original pieces of art inspired by the book, where we can auction them off and then raise funds for charity. I'm excited about speaking more internationally, and I'm excited to explore the potential of taking some of my work and converting it to the medium of television or film.
Wow.
So that's another project that I'm looking to explore.
That's quite amazing. Well, Simon, I do got to say this. You're somebody I've got to meet in person one day. So when you're in California, I'll take the driver, book a flight, and figure out how to, I guess, be in attendance or, take a photo with you in person. But thank you so much again. This has been one of the most enjoyable podcasts, as well as, something that I feel like I learned for free today. So
Dan, my pleasure. And thank you so much again.
It's been an honor. So thank you, Simon. Let me click the stop button.